Hello, this is Stephanie.
And this is Brian.
Welcome to the making and the remaking of a codependent mind. This episode is titled Self-Knowledge. But before we get to that, I want to wish you happy birthday.
Oh.
We're recording this today on Brian's birthday.
That's right. Yes.
And if you want to give him a happy birthday, you can pop on over to Amazon and click the rating button, The Making and the Remaking of a Codependent Mind, which Brian spent quite a bit of time on.
Thank you. Yes. Yeah, I couldn't imagine doing a more fun thing on my birthday, actually, than recording an episode. It's a lot of fun doing these episodes.
And also hearing from everybody.
I really do enjoy hearing from people when they reach out about their own experiences and ask questions about certain episodes that we do and things like that. I mean, I always respond, just so you know, I always respond to every message that we get because it enriches my own experience. You know, it gives me deeper understanding because we all are in this together. Again, just as a reminder, the email is codependentmind@gmail.com.
That's right. And there's also Facebook and Instagram.
Facebook and Instagram messages work fine too. Yes.
So self-knowledge.
Self-knowledge.
Knowledge of oneself. The reason we're doing this episode is because last episode, the truth episode, when we were advocating telling the truth, acknowledging that telling the truth is difficult, one strategy that we think works well between the two of us and across the board is to speak about your own experience. In most cases, that's going to be your best shot as approximating truth, is you're speaking from your own experience of the world. But much like we acknowledge that telling the truth is not always easy, but knowing yourself is also not always easy.
Yes, that's true. And that's actually the whole reason for this podcast, really, is getting to the self-awareness. It's not simple at all for a multitude of reasons. But yeah, we're going to talk about that and how specifically self-awareness can be a tool, a relationship tool, since that's the focus of this season.
How it functions in one's life and then also within relationship, kind of a functional account. And this was particularly challenging for you because, like we've been talking about, codependent behavior is inauthentic. That inauthenticity wasn't just directed at others, it was also directed inward. Right.
Most of the time it started with myself, being dishonest to myself about what I was really feeling, because it was difficult for me to do that. There were so many emotions that were difficult for me to handle that I kind of threw them all out in a way, or just muddled them and then had to come up with rationalizations to make sense of it all.
So there was that line to that yourself, creating distance to yourself, and then recovering from codependency. Breaking the codependency habit for you has necessitated something we've talked about over and over again, this rewriting of stories.
Right.
Like that's really at the core of the healing process, and also the self-knowledge, getting to know yourself, finally discovering who you are as a person.
Who I am and who I always was throughout this whole period of not really knowing myself. So it's uncovering, just kind of clearing away all this junk that got laid on top of who I was, including these false stories, false narratives. So yeah, in the book, and we did an episode on this back in season 2, episode 3. Rewriting stories, and then it was a very important piece in the book too, chapter 8.
I think you do a really good job in the book in particular about what that process is, and you give a couple of examples in the book of rewritten stories, how those stories originally functioned, and then how the rewriting process went and what you discovered in the process of rewriting. So we won't go in too much about that particular aspect of self-knowledge and self-discovery because it's covered elsewhere. And we're going to focus, as you said, kind of, again, more on how it functions in relationships.
Right, because relationships should really be a space for self-discovery rather than self-erasure. That was my main function in my previous relationships, was aligning myself with people, therefore minimizing my own needs, desires, everything.
Erasing yourself.
Right. Like one step at a time almost, yeah. To where myself was just completely lost, really.
And the consequences of that was both you didn't have a good sense of who you were, what you wanted from life, what you valued, what you needed from other people. But there was also kind of these funny situation, or we find it funny now looking back, where you had all these misconceptions about yourself, which is an interesting phenomena.
Right. All these little things that, you know, if say I'm getting in a conversation with a person I just met and they're like, what kind of things do you like? And so I had several things that I kind of collected over the years that I thought described me, because there's, oh yes, I did this or that repeatedly over the years.
And then you largely got from other people, really.
Yeah. Well, so yeah, most of these things I picked up from other relationships and then just, assumed that was who I was and that those are the types of things I enjoyed until I really actually started with this whole process of learning my emotions and how to read my emotions and then going, wait a second, so there's something off about this or that. So yes, I found these to be really funny. Actually, these were fun conversations that we had. We're at this place, we've talked about this before, where it actually feels good to be able to laugh about some of this stuff. That's what you get when you're able to sit through shame and have a new relationship to learning things about yourself that are kind of uncomfortable or shocking.
Or in this case, it's just a little silly.
Yeah. Because these are kind of inconsequential, but really, if you add them all together, it's just like, that's kind of a lot of stuff that I said about myself over the years.
And you thought about yourself.
Yeah, right. So some examples would be, I used to say that I enjoyed being naked, nudity, and so I remember at one of my houses, or actually both of those previous relationships that we talked about several times, and R and J, they were very exhibitionist. So I was like, yeah, I like that too. Yes, sure, I like being naked.
Although they didn't describe it as exhibitionism. They were just kind of, I'm comfortable with my body sort of thing.
No, that's what I now see it to be. Yeah. I mean, it was, neither one of them seemed to really understand it at all. And obviously neither did I. So we had this strange household where it's like, yes, clothing optional, sort of just, and I didn't realize that whole time that actually it made me very uncomfortable. I had this matching thing with being naked where like I didn't want to be naked on my own. Someone else had to be naked first. Or if I did get naked first, I was extremely uncomfortable until someone else did also. But this whole naked in public thing, or like, people coming over my house, like clearly optional, where like, that was not actually something I wanted to do.
Well, and also, I mean, you watch TV naked, which is fine, but you also like play board games.
Right.
We kind of figured that out because now we lived together for quite a while that, yeah, you never got naked. I mean, you never said, well, let's watch TV naked, or you would never lounge naked. So one, yes, you didn't like to be naked when someone else was naked, but also if I undressed for some reason, you felt you had to undress.
Yes, right. Oh, we're doing that? Yeah, okay. Right. Yeah. It was just a big matching thing.
But there are other things on the list. There's like karaoke.
Right. Yeah. I said I like that for some
so
reason.
You were
right.
all into karaoke, and we met, and we never got into karaoke.
No, I never wanted to suggest it. Actually, every time I thought about suggesting it, I got uncomfortable because once again, I didn't actually like it.
There was Halloween, dressing up.
Yep. Costumes. Right. Same thing. I'm just like, yeah, I love putting on costume. I have a costume box. Like, yeah, let's, but then once again, never suggesting it, never wanting to actually do it. I didn't like the process of thinking about costumes, putting them together.
That was matching both R and J as well. I mean, it's kind of this this interesting thing. I would be interested to hear from listeners these similarities that both your narcissistic partners had,
right? That
aren't kind of like core narcissistic trait. Like so, like yeah. Enjoying Halloween and dressing up. Obviously, not everyone who enjoys Halloween and dressing up is a narcissist, but it's interesting that both your narcissists were so into that. Both of them were so into nudity.
Which kind of makes sense. That's sort of the exhibitionist thing. Like it's wanting validation for being clever or sexy or whatever it is. Just like, here's something simple that they could do to get attention.
Pool maintenance, which you claim to.
That was kind of a funny one too. Just, I don't know. We lived in somewhere hot for a long period of time. This is where we met and got together. And when we moved in together, it's like, oh, I need a pool. I have to own a pool. I love having a pool. I love maintaining a pool. I love maintaining a yard. But then when we got together and I started doing these things, it very quickly went, actually, you know what? I don't like maintaining a pool. That's actually kind of annoying. And yard maintenance too. Actually, why did I think I liked that? Oh, well, then I did the rewriting the stories and thought about what it was I liked about it. And it was just, I remember telling myself at times like, it makes me feel like an adult. Basically, it gave me some control where I felt as though I didn't have any other control in my life. This is something that I could take care of. And it made me look as though I was responsible and to these people that thought otherwise had no respect.
So again, these are kind of somewhat inconsequential, but in some ways not, right? So it got you into situations in which you're uncomfortable. It got us into a house with a pool. So
right.
We enjoyed it, but we didn't actually need it. And neither of us at that point enjoyed keeping up. So, you make decisions on your life according to what you know about yourself. And you're going to make subpar decisions if the information you have about yourself is subpar.
So the bigger, more vital versions of this is really just being able to read my emotions, knowing when I'm happy, when I'm sad, when I'm angry, knowing when I am resonating with something. And that's really I wasn't doing that when, with all these things that I said I liked. It was, I did these things over and over, therefore I must like them. It's just like, that's how the rationality worked for me. So I must like this. Or, it's kind of with those relationships. I'm with this person, therefore I must love them. I'm doing things for them. Therefore, just, I'm not involving my emotions in that. So the self-awareness with emotions severed, it's really not. It's just assembling things that you think are facts.
And then there's also the pain and the shame that comes from not knowing yourself, not being able to explain yourself to other people, but even not being able to explain yourself to yourself.
Right. So in the case of, like, say, taking one of these things, for example, that I said I thought I liked, and then you say, well, how come we never do that? Oh, I don't know. I'm not sure. I don't know. Because that was usually, in the earlier days, that was my go-to. I don't know, or who knows, or, it was really more who knows.
And you felt shame in those moments.
Yes, especially when we're talking about kind of my entire arrangement of my life, the relationships I was in and living with these people and just not understanding why. Because it was one thing, like the first steps is being able to, like, admit that these relationships weren't even good and these people were not good. But then the bigger picture of that, the shame of the fact that, well, I was there though, so I made this choice somehow. Why is that? Yeah. So obviously I didn't know myself. And it's like, it's tempting to go, well, like, I'm just a bad judge of character. There's a lot more to it than that. And that's where the self-awareness comes in. So it's this whole entire podcast, really.
And this is shame relief. Like, knowing yourself is shame relief. I think that a lot of people are reluctant to dig deep because they think it's going to involve blaming and shaming themselves, because they feel, unfortunately, at some level that they really are defective, and they're not, and you are not. So the question of why were you with Jay, why were you with her, is not about shame and blame. It's about shame relief, because once you know and understand, that shame is relieved. You get both the relief of the shame, and you get the pleasure of knowing yourself. It's pleasurable to know yourself.
It really is, yeah. And it's completely vital when it comes to intimacy with another person, though.
So this is still, I guess, a little bit focused on the individual, right? We're talking about how knowing yourself gives you tremendous information about the world, increases your capacity to make decisions for yourself and for the people you care about exponentially. It also feels good. It does not feel good to not know. And, this is a thread that has existed throughout kind of human philosophy and human psychology. So probably people have heard the phrase by Socrates, thought of as one of the original philosophers, his saying that the unexamined life is not worth living. And then we jump ahead thousands of years to Maslow. Lots of people, I'm sure, have heard of Maslow's pyramid of needs, where we start with very basic sustenance needs, and what we get up to at the very top is self-actualization, is knowing yourself and expressing yourself in the world in an authentic way. That's the highest need we have. It's as important a need for a meaningful life, for this life that is worth living, is to know yourself.
And this goes back to also that I think we did an episode on, like, the serenity prayer. It talked about the wisdom to know the difference part. Obviously I was lacking in all three, but the wisdom to know difference part it really is the kicker for a lot of people. Is it's like, well, how do I really know what is in my power or not in my power? How do I even know? Do I have a frame of reference?
And that starts with yourself, because that's your largest window into the world. And if you block that, then your relationship to the world is going to be very problematic, as well as your relationship to other people. So again, the rewriting stories was a big part of getting to some aspect of self-knowledge, and that's outlined in season 2 episode and then in the book as well.
But also the sitting with your emotions, learning how to read and experience and feel your emotions, it goes along with that. You need to be able to do it, be doing both of those things simultaneously. Because
supposedly one of our superpowers as humans, as other species, is we have both the emotional signals, the emotional substructure, fairly advanced, and we have the rational mind. We're supposed to be able to use those together.
Yeah, right.
Which is, again, something that's talked about in season 2 and in the book. But self-knowledge isn't a light switch on or off. It's this continual process. So let's talk about how it works again in our relationship, how we both engage in this continual process of knowing ourselves.
So this whole idea of discovering things like, say, using codependency as a grouping of behaviors, and when we came across this together as a way to help describe some of what we saw my behaviors to be and how they related to my previous relationships, and just to start to make sense, it was very useful.
And it continues to be useful.
Yes.
Which is why we're continuing the podcast.
Yes, exactly.
Is that the codependency framework has been a useful framework for ongoing self-knowledge and self-discovery.
Mm-hmm. But the thing about this, about finding terms like codependency to describe things, it is just a tool. It's an in-between. It's a path to discovery. It's a path to continued discovery, but it's not the discovery itself. So I didn't discover that I'm codependent. I discovered these terms that other people, going back a long ways, lots of smart people out there talking about things and discovering things and then coming up with terms for it. It's very helpful. But yeah, ultimately, it's just a way to help me understand myself.
I think that's exactly right. It's not, as you said, it's not the discovery itself. It is a shortcut to discovery, a pathway to discovery, a guide, but it is not the discovery. That is not what you discovered.
Right.
Using the codependency framework, you have discovered a lot of things about yourself. But one of those things is not that you are codependent.
That I'm codependent, right? Yeah, it's some kind of thing that I somehow inhabit, and that's it. Sorry, how unfortunate for me. I just need to live with this or something. I mean, there are things like that we can discover, but this is not one of them. This is not some kind of physical malady or something. Or, like we've said, before, it's just I'm tall or something. This is not a discovery, like some kind of permanent state.
Nevertheless, using diagnoses, using other terms that people have developed, using frameworks, that's a great way. And again, can be a good shortcut. It was really for you and for us when we were in the beginning really struggling to understand all this. The codependency framework helped us do a lot of work in a much shorter period of time than if we were just doing it ourselves, which obviously this is why we're having the podcast, because we're hoping the podcast does the same for other people. We're not trying to tell people who they are. We're just trying to give them language that they can use in their own path of self-discovery and give them your example of how you used this framework to learn about yourself. Yeah,
I remember how exciting that was when you had brought up the possibility. And it wasn't just codependency, it was codependency narcissism link specifically. And I was reading about it going, holy crap, this is like everything. This is just explaining everything.
Well, and this was, the reason that I brought that link more specifically is because we were in this moment where I was kind of pushing, like, I need to understand what this relationship with Jay was all about and why you were there. And you were experiencing a lot of shame for having been there and not knowing. So when this came up, I think for both of us, like, whoa, okay, this makes sense.
It was organizing. So, because I remember those earlier days of it felt like just all these disconnected, why am I bad at that? Why do I say this? I don't know. How is any of this related? And once again, this idea of codependency is not an actual thing. It's just an explanation, a way to help, but it did help for sure.
So having a framework has been helpful to us. Other things that are helpful to us in terms of our own ongoing journeys to self-discovery is having what we've talked about in the previous episodes of the season, having a curious, open mindset towards ourselves. So in the first episode where we did the lean startup methodology, it was about treating statements even about ourselves as hypotheses, not resting on, oh, now I know myself. Oh, yes, I love being naked. I know that about myself. That's absolutely true. Like, it's always the possibility that you have grown and changed in a way that you yourself maybe didn't notice. So treating yourself as you probably want other people to treat you, in that recognizing that you change and there's always stuff to discover.
Yes, right. Because is frustrating when you experience other people that don't really know you that think they do. It's kind of a similar feeling.
That's a thing I think a lot of us struggle, say, with our families of origin, who perhaps knew us very well or thought they knew us very well when we were young. But then they carry those mental models throughout your life. So you could go back and visit your family as a 40-something-year-old, and they're going to treat you like the same things you did when you were 14, or you have the same challenges you did when you were 12, because they're just treating the knowledge that they had of you as a permanent fact about the world. And that's frustrating. And so you shouldn't do that to yourself either.
Right, exactly.
And it's not about, again, it's not a shameful thing to grow and to change and to discover that you don't like something that you used to like, or vice versa. Right. There's no shame in that. Right.
Another thing we do together is to get to the truth, to get to the self-awareness, is asking questions, asking ourselves questions, asking each other questions.
Specifically about feelings.
About feelings, right.
Or about our emotions.
Yeah, pretty regularly nowadays, if I'm feeling off in some way on a particular day, I find it helpful to think about why I think that is. Because my history was just like to try to avoid that feeling. Like, I don't like this feeling. And I felt it all the time because I had a lot of good reasons to feel it, to feel off. But I didn't want to feel off, so I figured out how to not feel off. But nowadays, it's I feel compelled to ask myself why I'm feeling off. And sometimes I need help with that. And that's what's great about a relationship, is being able to talk through what it is that I think, so I'll mention I'm feeling off. And then, oh, really? What do you think? And then we start talking about potential reasons. And then by the end of the conversation, it makes sense. I may not have necessarily solved a particular issue, but I understand it a lot better.
Which relieves it, which is pain relief. Even if the feeling is still bad, at least you know where it's coming from. And you can potentially have a plan to move on from it at some point.
Yeah, that's really the only way to come up with a plan.
But it's the habit of checking in with yourself, which you're describing as new, and which is something that I've tried to get better as well, is just literally asking myself, how am I feeling? How specific can I get with that feeling? With also positive feelings, like making sure I'm noticing those as well. And I'm thinking about where those are coming from. So then I know what I like and value as well as what I don't like and I want to move away from. And again, if I'm struggling to answer that question for myself, how am I feeling or why am I feeling that way? It is great, as you said, to have a partner that you can bounce it off on, who also knows you well enough to sometimes say, well, maybe it's this, or remember when that happened and you felt that way, maybe it's the same feeling that you have. I mean, this is also why therapy can be useful, is to someone who has an emotional language and a knowledge of you to help you think through these signals that you're getting from your emotional life.
And a really great thing about having a relationship where you prioritize emotional intimacy is that I feel equally compelled to know how you are feeling about things, because that's important to me, not just because I care about you and empathize with you, but that just makes the relationship work better for both of us. If I'm equally interested in what your experience is with something as I am about my own.
We make joint decisions better together then, and each of our lives are improved. So an example of how these discussions go, for instance, is you were feeling off about work recently.
Yeah. So with work, I've had so many helpful conversations with you about work and how to approach how I really feel about my job and my interactions with people. But in every time it's helpful in a new way. And this most recent one was thinking about why these past couple of weeks, I felt as though I had kind of an outsized reaction to things that I've already decided didn't really matter all that much. But somehow I was still finding myself taking on too much of a negative emotional load, like reaction to mostly internal coworker interactions. And so, yeah, it just really helped to dig into, okay, why is this bothering me? Is it even actually bothering me? Or, is it more of a habitual reaction, which actually kind of turned out to be?
Yeah, and you were kind of beating yourself up a little bit because you felt you had moved beyond it. So one kind of useful exercise that I think we did was to talk about how you were in the past, which was much more emotionally reactive.
Yes, I could barely handle anything.
To work in particular, like the amount of power work had over your emotional state was substantial. So reflecting on kind of how you've grown, I think was useful because it just allowed you to congratulate yourself a little bit for that growth.
Right. And we've thought about, certain weeks or months that I've had where I was like, my God, I can't imagine how I would have handled this week or month 5-10 years ago. I would have buckled in some way.
And then so we talked about the past a little bit, but then we talked about the present, what was going on in the present, what you thought was maybe affecting your current state. And then we talked a little bit about the future. Like, yeah, so the present is better than the past, but maybe it's not quite where you want to be in terms of your relationship to work.
Right. And so then I kind of came to this conclusion. There were certain things that I just didn't need to be reacting the way I was reacting. It wasn't actually adding any value, taking on as much emotional pain, I guess, to certain expectations, or trying to manage more than I needed to be managing, which was really having no effect anyway in the larger ecosystem of what I was doing.
And so this past, present, future, I guess, framework was useful in taking these emotional signals that you had and kind of fleshing them out to a bigger picture of what was going on with you and your relationship to work. We use that too within our relationship as well. When we're having either a challenge or struggling to understand what's going on with one or both of us within the relationship, is just to figure out, are we responding to something that's happening in the present? Let's look at our past and see in the ways in which it's connected to what's happened in our past relationship and how we have grown and what are the changes. Just keeping track of those, keeping track of how that relationship has grown, making sure that we're paying attention, like we want the people in our lives to pay attention to our growth, making sure we're paying attention to how the relationship has grown and we have each grown within it. Also, then what's happening in this present moment and how is the present connected to the future? What do we want to see in terms of growth in ourselves and with the relationship in the future? And are we moving towards that?
And I like when, it just makes it so much easier when we go straight to some kind of emotional state that one or either of us is having. Like, so it being as simple as sometimes I'm feeling disconnected right now. Like this, whatever happened over the course of some conversation we may have been having, I'm feeling disconnected. What happened here? Let's talk about that. See if we can try to get back on track somehow to figure out what it was that derailed our emotional connection.
Knowing that about yourself, what you're feeling is a disconnection from your partner. I think that's pretty obvious how useful a tool that is in maintaining the connection. So being able to know it, but then it's amplified. If you then are able to say it, you do say it, and then you get to talk about it with your partner.
Right.
And problem solve together.
And work through it, right?
So that's that first tool. That's why, self-knowledge kind of underlies all of these other tools that we're talking about, like trust, like vulnerability, like curiosity. If that self-knowledge isn't there, it can be hard to build those other pieces out.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And then so part of the process of emotional intimacy is one or both of you are not always going to have it completely perfectly nailed on what it is you're feeling in a particular moment. So that's part of the process, is making sure you're always trying to figure out what that is.
Yeah. And so, I don't know that much about CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, but I believe that its premise is that how you think about things affect how you feel about things, and then how you feel about things affect how you act, such that we've changed the way that we think about things, then we can change the way we feel about them, we change the way we can act, which I think works a lot of time, but I don't think that's a perfect formula. But I absolutely believe that those pieces should work together. They evolve together. Those pieces being, again, our emotional system, our rational system, and our behavioral motivation system. Our thoughts, our feelings, our actions ideally are integrated and that work together to move us through life in a way that maximizes our opportunities for happiness and success and connectedness and meaning.
This actually reminds me of the epigraph from our book. I'll just read it here. It's from Audre Lorde. I'm constantly defining myself, for I am, as we all are, made up of so many different parts. But when those selves war within me, I am immobilized. And when they move in harmony or allowance, I'm enriched, made strong.
I love that word, harmony. That's what we're looking for, to feel harmonious with ourselves. And then we're looking for and constantly trying to achieve harmony with our partner as well. And I think you can hear in that quote the pleasure that comes from having that harmonious existence. And the opposite of harmony being discord or dissonance, and how unpleasant and often painful that experience is.
Yes. And how chaotic it can feel. And then how difficult that makes life when that chaos is there. So self-knowledge is, again, not an end game. It's a process.
It's like making music.
Yeah.
We're making music together.
Right. We'll be back next time with another relationship tool
to help you make beautiful music within your relationships.